Okay, we are going to get started with our panel today, and it is titled Focusing on the Student Experience and How These Universities Drive Innovation in Their Creator Communities. We are going to first introduce Brandon Frazho. Hi, Brandon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So I will now introduce Brandon. Brandon Frazho is the Assistant Director of Academic Initiatives at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. His higher education experience consists of student affairs expertise, academic procedures, strategic initiatives, program administration, community outreach, and more. His passion for seeing students learn and grow motivated him to also teach an introductory course at UTK and become a certified strengths coach. Brandon, we'd love to hear more about University of Tennessee, Knoxville and the LLC that you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you for being here, or thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to kind of present, get to network, connect, all those things. So this year in particular, we have about 11 LLCs. I feel like that ends up being about the average. I've seen it sometimes as high as 14. It kind of just depends. Next year, we actually plan to have 12. So we're excited to get another one on board. Sometimes we get one or two that'll jump on, or at least let us know early enough so we can start planning for that at that point in time. Venture is our big one in particular that deals with our College of Business, the Haslam College of Business. They do pretty much everything from management, entrepreneurship to business analytics, finance, economics, a little bit of everything. There's usually anywhere in all of our LLCs, anywhere between 800 to 1,200 people, students that are in these. I know that one in particular, our venture community last year had about 100 applications. I think it was exactly 99. And so we end up usually having a yield of like 80 or so. I think we had 79 this year that joined us for that in particular. We got every kind of LLC from engineering. There's one for public affairs now, which is more recent, Army, Air Force honors. And like I said, this one is venture, and so I'm excited to chat more about it.
Amazing. Yeah, I look forward to seeing more about your programming. Great. Well, now I would like to introduce Sari Judge. Sarah serves as the program manager at Startup Learning Community at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she assists first-year students in navigating the startup ecosystem of both UW-Madison campus and the city. She has over 10 years of higher education experience in experiential learning and fostering entrepreneurship. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to hear more about your role at UW-Madison.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. As that beautiful introduction from Camille said, I'm Sari. I'm the program manager with the Startup Learning Community at UW-Madison, which is a housing-based, of course, a learning community for 64 students, and we're in one of our most popular halls at UW-Madison. So our students self-select in terms of our overall ecosystem. We also have from a learning community standpoint, there's also a business learning community. Our students are mixed in terms of major and startup. That's sort of part of our idea, is that it fosters innovation to have students that come from different intellectual and academic disciplines. But we also have a women in science and engineering, so we cross-pollinate with them a little bit. We have a learning community around biology. We have some of our more gender and identity learning communities. We also have our learning communities have been around for a long time at UW-Madison, startup probably 20 years old now, which makes us kind of middle-aged in the UW-Madison learning community universe. And I've been with the program for 10 years and I've got to grow with it. And the thing that I like the most is I get to be entrepreneurial. So
Incredible. And it sounds like you both work with so many amazing student creators. Why do you think housing is important to support student creators? I'll start with you, Brandon.
Yeah, so housing, obviously, being my position, being the assistant director within kind of our residence life side of things, obviously have a little bit of a affinity towards that in particular, where we're trying to create that home away from home for them in particular. So we really want to make sure that they find their community, find their network. And I feel like a lot of times, having them all, whether it be a floor, a wing, a building, to have them kind of together allows them to form that pretty much from day one. Like as soon as they get here, they jump into the community, they get to kind of start building that network. I know some students, maybe they're more concerned about their roommate or other things. And so we try to obviously recruit enough people to allow for some of those things to be able to work as well. But some people want kind of that network outside the classroom. They want to be able to have that experiential learning, be able to do things kind of on the fly. And be able to kind of even generate ideas, be able to kind of get with your neighbors and essentially say, hey, these are things that I'm interested in doing. Maybe your skill is marketing or something like that. It allows for pretty much all of that. So I think it's just an important part of their journey to kind of have that home, that community, that home base, live with some like-minded folks that are also passionate about similar things. They're also going to have some differences too. So you get some exposure to things maybe that's different than your hometown, things that you grew up with. And so that allows you to kind of open yourself up to different values and things like that. But I think in general, kind of the three things that I know they're trying to learn to do sometimes is learn how to fail. So to learn to actually do things and see what comes of it. To obviously learn to connect with others, and then also to learn how to get involved. So to how to, what different opportunities or organizations are out there for me, and having housing and the different RA and hall director staff there to help support that is key. And so having all these stakeholders come together, I mean, a lot of times I'm just kind of the liaison between so many different parts of campus life, but we want to make sure that they're, succeeding in all that they do in their experience here.
Everything Brandon said by 100, times it by 100. But one of the things that's really interesting about the startup learning community, because our students come from different or they believe they're coming from, some of them haven't declared their majors yet, different academic disciplines. We're about a third business or pre-business students, a third computer science or engineering, which are both very large programs at UW-Madison students, and then a third traditional letters and science students. Maybe you're a bio major, maybe you're a French major, maybe you're a poli-sci major. And our hope is that in our perfect world, that the startup learning community, the fact that these 64 students live together, share space, share a seminar class, and I get into that in a little bit, but that they're sharing that shared space, the den, that we want that to work as an entrepreneurial think tank, basically. And we want students to be brushing their teeth next to each other and realize that the toothpaste dispenser doesn't work properly, and for them to come up with a solve on how to make that better. So our idea is, how do you sort of like build, bake into the cake of the fact that they're first year students that are living together. There are challenges and opportunities that come with that. What is it that you learn about each other? And what I've found, actually, one of the reasons that I was a minute late to this is I had two of my students sitting here, and I was explaining to them how our grant program worked, and they had never thought of the idea that they could use their own problems, the things that they see as issues every day, as a springboard for startup idea, for an entrepreneurial venture. And so just kind of being able to have that opportunity with students to explain to them that the problem that you have, you're probably not the only person with this problem. And all great startups solve a problem. And you've identified one, step one. Now you can work on how you can build that to solve it. And they came together. They're roommates. Yeah.
That's
And they would
incredible.
have never met each other if they weren't roommates. So
Exactly. I think that really speaks to the value of productive collisions. And I remember in my undergrad just how transformative it was when I realized this is the place where it's okay to fail. And it sounds like your communities are really fostering that positive encouragement and just trying things out. That's awesome. Great. So I would love to hear some lessons learned working in and supporting students in living learning communities. Brandon, would you mind sharing some lessons learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, college university life is the opportunity to essentially transition and kind of assimilate in. And so I think the biggest thing is we have to sometimes adapt and grow with what we're faced with kind of each year, whether it be things that we've had to transition during COVID times. And I know we're kind of still in COVID times sometimes. And so, the different things that we've had to offer and switch over to Zoom at points in times to make sure that those are successful, or the ways that we've kind of had to reorganize or think our events and things like that. I mean, I think each year there's different students coming in with different needs. And so you have to kind of find ways to meet them where they're at. You have to find ways to, maybe something worked one year and maybe that's great. That doesn't mean it's going to work. And so that's some of the failure on our end too, where maybe, in getting kind of the student voice, we realize there's adaptations we need to make or changes we need to make sure that they're really having the best experience that they can. That's one of the biggest things that I know we do as a part of our living and learning communities in terms of like structure. We actually have ambassadors that are kind of put forth for each LLC, and sometimes those are the faculty, the staff liaisons will let us know, our partners will let us know, like, hey, we feel like this person would be great. And other times they didn't even realize that somebody that's interested in being involved. And so we kind of help connect them to the hall staff and things like that and make sure everyone's communicating across the board. But we want to make sure that we're supporting them in whatever ways and resources they may need. That may mean we need to try something new. We may need to try something differently. But yeah, that student voice is key. And so I love being able to have, so my grad assistant directly kind of advises those student ambassadors. We get their voice. They also help put on events and things like that right there in the residence halls. And so, yeah, I just think sometimes you have to learn to transition with the transition that they're coming in with in particular. Every year is going to be a little bit different. You're not going to know sometimes how to deal with or how to face things. But it's really just, trying to gather feedback and assessment in whatever ways you can and making sure that you're kind of being that voice for students at times as well.
Yeah. Oh, been at this 10 years. There are so many lessons that I've learned, but I think that probably the most important one is that we, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, we're just the beginning. We're not the end. Working with first year students, all we want to do, and just for a little bit of context, and this has really just happened in the last few days, but our Chancellor Jennifer Mnuchin has just come out with her 4 big initiatives for the university. And again, UW-Madison is an extremely large university. And one of her main initiatives is entrepreneurship and how to foster kind of a founder's culture. How do we commercialize more discovery that happens at UW-Madison? And for our undergrads, how do we implant an entrepreneurial spirit in hope that they might just become entrepreneurs, which is the major economic engine for the state? And so it is the lesson that I think I've learned and that I often talk about with our students is that the idea that you have now does not have to be the idea that you graduate with or the idea that you bring to life for the rest. It might be. It absolutely might be. But if it's not, that's fine. It's trying something. That if anyone that's sort of brave enough to get up in front of their classmates, talk about their idea, apply for a grant, take part in a competition, they're going to get the bug. And so we basically want to infect our students with entrepreneurial fever. And the lesson that I've learned is that it's just to have an idea and to take that first step. The students I was just with right before this were very much like, how do you know if it's a good idea? And I'm like, you're going to know once you build it. You're going to know once you get it in front of people. And that's really, I think a lot of it is, you can tell gray hair. I'm kind of an old lady. And so I've been around in higher education and other industries for a long time. And I think to Brandon's point with COVID, like there's some things that have shifted about students today. And there's technology that is accessible in huge parts of their lives that, wasn't true when even my 27-year-old kid was going to college. And so the idea that they have worries and concerns and stuff that makes them think in very different ways. And what can we do and provide both in terms of community building, but also in terms of permission, the confidence to do something that you're not sure it's going to work.
Definitely. It's so exciting that entrepreneurship is a big initiative going for UW-Madison.
Yeah.
And Sarah, you mentioned that you have 10 years of experience in the ELLC. How have you seen the ecosystem change for entrepreneurs, for student founders in your time?
What's interesting is the ecosystem in Madison at UW isn't terribly different. Maybe it will be now that we're a major priority for the chancellor. But it is what has changed is the 10 years ago, every student that had an idea would have told me that they either want to be, they want to be the Uber of whatever is next. Everything was like all about just an app that they could code and bring to market I'm not even sure they necessarily knew what kind of problem they were going to solve. It was all, and now I think students, and one of the things that we work on in startup too is, even though startups may technically be, oh, this is an idea that you're incubating that you're going to be able to scale someday. And those are awesome. But we also want what might be more traditionally considered small business, those ideas to start here too. And one of the things I've noticed, especially, and I hate being, gendered when I don't need to be, but a lot of our female students are much more interested in consumer packaged goods ideas, health and beauty ideas, fashion ideas, than necessarily something I can code it and what's the idea going to be. And we want to give permission for those kinds of companies to start up also. Heck, if you want to start a food truck in downtown Madison, that counts as entrepreneurship for us as well. It is entrepreneurship.
That's great. Yeah, I think it shows the importance of using language such as creator and founder and not just the standard entrepreneurship, which has previously been stereotypical business student or even engineering student. I'll pass it over to Brandon now. So intellectual diversity is such a huge part of making these things a reality. Are there any programs or things you put into place to help promote intellectual diversity in the LLCs?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it kind of depends. Like, again, a lot of times we're meeting each LLC kind of where they're at. And, there's obviously the two different components in the LLC itself. You have the living component, you have the learning component. We obviously have a common course for students that are obviously in LLCs. Now, some of these programs, they want to have an entire semester of this is kind of what we want to offer. This is what we want our students to go through. Others, we have an entire year. And then others, it's just obviously that one class. And so that's been the nice thing is even through different partnerships and things like that, I've been able to teach a business class in those classes. Like it is very much like an introductory, I think some universities call them more of like a general studies or first year experience course. Like they're all kind of that similar vibe where you're finding out kind of the group of the cohort that's coming in particular. They're going to come from all walks of life, all different places that they're at. And you're kind of trying to guide them to different things, opportunities, resources, things like that. I know even in some of the recruitment process for some of them, maybe they are getting more male identifying students, more female identifying students. Typically for our venture community, they lean heavily towards men. I think that's just because of some of the things we just talked about in terms of like the business classification and, maybe when we want to go into marketing and is that in the same college and things like that. But yeah, it's really just kind of offering all these different opportunities, programming in the residence halls, having that community development. We do different things, obviously, even with like our RAs and hall directors to make sure we're connecting with students on a one-on-one basis to get to know kind of where they're at. And facilitating, if there's, civil discourse, that's natural to happen and things like that. And so again, we want to make sure that we're kind of just advocating for each student, making sure that they, hear each other, they actually understand each other and kind of can move forward. A lot of times they all have a similar goal. And so sometimes it's pointing them towards that. You're obviously somebody that this could be somebody you work with someday in particular, no matter where you were when you came in. And so I think that's some of the importance of, if you're able to build in even peer mentors and things like that, sometimes that's a great resource. I know our Haslam College of Business, they do a great job with that. They hire plenty of peer mentors, some of which have become RAs and things like that too. And so you have students that have kind of walked that life. They know that transition period. They know all the same concerns and things that they had coming in, and they'll help kind of guide some of those students. So even when I teach that class, I have a peer mentor right there in the classroom. One of their class assignments is to actually have a one-on-one with that student as well, to make sure that they even get life advice and things like that. And so we just try to offer as many different things as possible. If I see a student struggling, I want to make sure that they're succeeding. So reach out to them, see if there's resources that I can help with. And that's the nice thing about University of Tennessee Knoxville is we have a lot of resources. So there's a lot of people that I can connect them to and sometimes even walk them over to those resources as well.
That's great. I think it shows how impactful entrepreneurship can be in the college setting because even without that, just the amount of support that college students receive is great. So that's awesome. And Sarah, what about any programs or ways that UW-Madison tries to increase intellectual diversity, and maybe when you're accepting applications, what do you look for in your LLC?
So we're a little bit different than Brandon. At UW-Madison, you don't apply to be, you're part of the housing process. So students preference us. We're their first choice of where to live, but we don't get to choose the students that are there. They choose us. And we always look for a balance, a gender balance on the floor as well, because of, you know, intellectual diversity. That's a type of intellectual diversity is maybe men and women or male and female identifying students are going to come at things differently. The other thing that we do to promote intellectual diversity, very much, it was a very, even though I am an employee of the Wisconsin School of Business and the startup learning community is affiliated with the Wisconsin School of Business, we do not want all of our students to be business or pre-business students. And so, what we say is like, you can be any major. It's really looking for intellectual diversity or type of intellectual diversity. And maybe someone is going to come up with a democracy building app. That might not come from somebody who can code it or from someone who can figure out how to monetize it. The business school student, that might come from a classics major or a political science major. And so that's the problem that they see in the world. So that kind of intellectual diversity is really important to us. And I don't see a time in which we'll ever say we actually have a community for all business students. Some of them are interested in entrepreneurship and we do programming together, but we want to have those differences on the floor. The other thing that's really interesting about UW-Madison is we have an extremely, 20% of our students are international, less than 50% of our students come from Wisconsin. And so we have students from we're a national university that's located in Wisconsin, basically. And so there is just so much, just if you grow up in the Bay Area or you grow up in rural Wisconsin or you grow up in Madison, which is a small city in Wisconsin, or you're from New York or you're from Florida, there's just the geographic diversity also breeds a type of intellectual diversity. And I love every, summer when I find out who's going to live with me, finding out where students are from. And I'm like, I know that breakdown is going to make a difference in the kinds of ideas and the kind of spirit that we can develop on the floor.
That's great. And going off of that, and intellectual diversity just increases with scale. And given that both of you have larger LLCs, how have you found that program scale matters, Brandon?
Yeah, so it matters a lot, but I think it matters sometimes even in the capacity that some of our partners have in terms of those classes that they're in. And, if you're doing an application-based process, biggest thing I think that we're looking at a lot of times is just their major to make sure that they're fitting, they're eligible within the college. But then obviously there's going to be certain points that people might apply, very early in January. It might be all the way in May that they decide to do so. So we've done some studies even kind of within our division, the Division of Student Life. We obviously work with the Division of Student Success, which is a separate division here, kind of all in the same realm. And we've seen LLC sizes from 10 people, which is kind of the absolute minimum we can go with because we want to make sure they're connecting with some folks other than others, all the way up to like 400, which is one of our honors communities, our engineering community. I would say venture is kind of right behind that. Usually it's still one of the larger kind of like mid-size ones. We try to give them at least a floor if we can, because obviously if you have an entire floor, that's a good way to kind of expand that reach to make sure you're having a good range of diversity. But it depends. Every year you're going to get different levels of applications. And so I think a lot of times it comes down to recruitment. It comes down to getting the word out there that this is an opportunity for students. Because again, when you're some of these larger institutions, there's going to be so many opportunities that they can get their hands on, but they don't know, which ones are going to be more impactful coming in. Maybe their first generation student, that's obviously going to be somebody that's in a different place. Depending on their socioeconomic status, that may be a concern, if there's certain fees that are tacked onto some of these programs and things. And so, yeah, our community, like I said, it's usually a floor or two. I know that they've even switched buildings because we heard from students, hey, we're having a great time being next to the business building, we actually want to have like better dining options and things like that. And so sometimes it's having those conversations with liaisons to figure out, and I chat with some of the RAs too to figure out, where can we best support these changes. Maybe we try this for a year, and if we need to switch it up. But I'm pretty supportive of if they've got some sort of thing that's out there that they feel like is hindering them, something that's going to increase the population that they're going to get or the interest in it, then at least we'll look at some of those avenues to figure out, what can we do? Because again, it all comes down to success, and we want to make sure that they're having the absolute best experience that they can here within that LLC.
Yeah, in terms of my thoughts on scale, of course, scale matters, and the quality of the program will shift in different directions depending on the scale of the program. For us, one of the most centering things is our MHR 320 class, essentially our intro entrepreneurship class, that all students on the floor, they are not required to take it, but are highly encouraged to take it. Their first year, it's a 3-credit class taught by my faculty director, Professor John Surdick in the Wisconsin School of Business. And if we had 600 students in startup, not all 600 students are going to get that same access to Professor Surdick. And so the ability to connect with faculty, both faculty that are tenure track and are doing research, and faculty like Professor Surdick who are more applied, have launched startups before, organize entrepreneurship conferences, academic conferences on campus. That access to him, we think, is huge and an incredibly important part of the learning. And if it's not Professor Surdick, it'll be somebody else. But having that access to faculty is an important part of the first year experience. So if we were significantly larger, students would not have that same experience with him. We've discussed growing, so we're 64 students because that's what one wing of one hall is in the dorm that we're located in. We've talked about we could double or triple in size in interested male candidates, but we've decided that it's really important for the societal diversity essentially that it offers, that we want to be as close to 50-50 as possible. And we would not be able to, at least this juncture, my hope is we're going to be able to change that and get more women at a younger age exploring the idea of entrepreneurship. And frankly, we have to work with high schools to be able to do that. But if we would not be able to fill a second floor, likely with enough women who are passionate, and you don't have to, we have some students on the floor that just live, eat, breathe entrepreneurship all the time. We have some that are a little bit more on the fringes, and we don't require anything of anybody. But that idea of we want the passion and the ability to connect with faculty. And then frankly, I've actually worked in part-time with one of our larger learning communities before, and I didn't know the students. I didn't like it. And so it wasn't fun for me. Like doing programming for students I didn't know wasn't personally rewarding. Not that this is all about me, but I do think that's one of the things you have to think about is your staffing and scale, and especially for first-year students, because the kind of wraparound supports, services, opportunities to bounce ideas off of people. You know what? I want to know their name. And so scale, and what would be amazing to have, and if we brainstormed about this, I don't know, I'm going to go out and raise like $60 million, is I think having a first-year learning community is fantastic. It would be amazing if we had a smaller living, learning community of upperclassmen who actually have ideas that we could really, really nurture. They're much further along in their journey, and to be able to sort of take them to the next level. And that would be a smaller learning community, and maybe there'd be a makerspace there and those sorts of things. We do not have a lot of entrepreneurial wraparound services right in the building. We have them on campus. We have everything you could ever want. But in terms of it being like you could go in your slippers, their celery looks like a regular residence hall.
Got it. And just to switch gears a little bit, but still with growing it, I want to learn more about your programs. Do you have any pointers or insights on how to get partners off campus involved in supporting student creators at your LLCs? Brandon?
Yeah, so I think honestly it's not being afraid to fail and getting out there and just kind of expressing the need, the interest, things like that. I know, one of our hall directors here, I think it's a great example to kind of use some of what he's done, or at least he was a hall director. He's actually in Ohio now, but he just went out and essentially started networking with like Texas Roadhouse and all these different companies. And they were willing to kind of even come in and do donations. I think at one point in time they were grilling out Texas Roadhouse steaks like out at their facilities in this residence hall. So I think a lot of times it's just getting yourself out there in particular, making sure to voice that, there's all these awesome students that really like even in class, there's all these awesome students and they want to hear from people that are in these spaces. They want to hear from people that are creators, that are business owners, that are, they've done a startup or something like that. And so I think those have been some of my most impactful classes sometimes is inviting in one of those people, just giving them kind of the reins or maybe giving them a list of bullets of like, here's different things that I think they'd love to learn from, from resume builders and things like that. They're trying to get the experience one day at a time and to be able to digest and take all that in. Sometimes you really have to take it kind of step by step. Again, getting that student voice, we try to do an annual survey to get, different student feedback across the board, everything from facilities to different types of things. And that's why we work with our academic partners. What do you need? What can we do to support you? How can we get more things involved? And even if that is local businesses and things, okay, here's a list of, if you want pizza, here's a list of some of the local vendors that I think would be great to work with, that would be excited to kind of work with you in your community. And I know, like I said, we've had all sorts of different local companies pitch in, even when we had different changes to like kind of our student housing where we were in need essentially of those things. There's a lot of local places that are wanting to help and volunteer and all those different opportunities. We have a lot of folks kind of even volunteer for move-in. And so I know for like our venture folks, we had like 4 or 5, I think, different staff members from the business management, entrepreneurship space come in just to greet students on their floor, like, hey, here's some snacks and goodies and things like that. And I think all those things are super impactful because the students will then remember those names and those faces and be able to kind of approach them if they do need things, even in their classes and in that building itself.
Community partnerships are incredibly valuable, and Madison has a pretty healthy, as a city, very much driven by the university, a very healthy entrepreneurship ecosystem. So we do a lot of the stuff that Brandon was talking about. We invite area entrepreneurs to come in and have dinner with our students. And, hey, if they're startup alums, even better. We have an alum coming back who works with the Startup Citizen, the public safety app, is coming back to have lunch with our students. Just wants to connect. That kind of stuff is fantastic. But we have very strong relationships with Starting Block, which was essentially the entrepreneurial space in Madison. It's not even really a co-working space. It's a kind of a nurturing community where nascent companies, startup companies can get really inexpensive office space to be able to launch from. We have a great relationship with them and their programs, and we take our students there every year so that they can see what it feels like to live in Madison, and what would be like to launch here. Of course, that's our dream. They all stay, they launch. It's in Wisconsin, go team. Then we also have Generator, which is a large national accelerator, especially in the risk space, but they work in all sorts of different disciplines. They are Wisconsin born and they're Madison born and bred. It's actually a UW alum, Troy Bossler, who started that. So it's an opportunity for our students, and they do some programs on campus. Our CSNS competition is kind of part of their G Alpha program. So we can start to, not like first year students need to know what an accelerator is, but to let them know these are the kinds of people that you're going to have to know if you've got an idea that can be taken to the next level.
Totally. I think you both pointed out the value of experiential learning. And I remember when I was a student, some of the most memorable things were when a speaker came, whether an alum or a community member with a small business. I think that is a really important pillar in entrepreneurship in the college space. Well, both, we are running out of time here, but that was such a great conversation, and I appreciate you both being here. If anyone in the audience has any last-minute questions, send them our way, and we'll get ready for our final panel. Again, thank you so much to both of you.